Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So today we are going to be covering what is actually a pretty crazy development legally. And if those of you haven't seen, I know a lot of you have, the new DOD Directive 5420 that essentially grants the Department of Defense the lawful ability to use lethal force and gather intelligence on American citizens. All right, a lot of people have reached out to me about this video, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's also kind of surprising how little traction this got in the media, based off of, and we're going to get into the details of this, how actually massive this directive actually is, and what basically could be the second and third order effects downwind from this in the future. Okay, a lot of confusion around this. And it makes sense because as I walk you guys through this, there's a lot of legal loopholes, a lot of tricks that the federal government used to be able to push this through legally. All right. And I'm going to do my best to, and when we get into DOD directives, constitutional law, all sorts of stuff goes into this, pretty convoluted. All right. So I'm going to do my best to really walk you guys through start to finish, the players involved, how this actually came to be, right? How it's actually potentially going to be used, and why they did it as well. Okay, so again, a lot of bad information out about this, because again, it's a super complex thing, and especially with the way they did it. So let's jump into it. First thing we need to do is really understand who exactly is actually being granted this authority, okay? Because it actually is very, very important to understand, and it's one of the ways that the Department of Defense is actually getting away with this is through some loopholes, all right? So I know most people, when they, like myself, right, immediately first heard this, that the Department of Defense has now got authority to use lethal force on citizens. That sounds super un-American. We all know that the U.S. military is not allowed to be used against or domestically or against citizens, okay? This is true through the Posse Comitatus Act. So what that was, essentially after the Civil War, and we'll put it up so we can really look at it, that's when the government decided that it did not want the military being used for local law enforcement procedures, okay? And first it was just the Army, right? And then it's been expanded over the years to include pretty much every military organization in the Department of Defense, right? So the Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force even does fall under the Posse Comitatus Act. But if we notice, as you saw in the DOD directive, we're granting that authority to defense intelligence components. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we're not granting it to the Army, Air Force, Navy. We're granting it to separate DOD sort of agencies or components. All right, so it's a tricky way to get past that. All right, so it's important to understand, like, when exactly, because Posse Comitatus can be sort of breached, right, in certain situations. What situations are those? All right, first is the use of the National Guard. Okay, so as we know, the National Guard can actually respond to things that are happening domestically, and that is because the National Guard units, like let's say the Oregon National Guard, is actually owned by the state, not by the federal government. Okay, so that's why the National Guard can actually be used domestically, because they're a state-based organization, not federal, unlike the typical military units you think of. Second, martial law. Okay, so martial law can be declared. All bets are off when martial law is declared. All right, you can potentially use the military for domestic threats or whatever in that regard. But martial law is extremely difficult to actually process through. It's super complex. The next one is just bypassing it by law, okay? And that's what they've decided to do here, is they've changed the laws, okay? And we're gonna go over that. Now, a lot of people also assume, okay, well, doesn't the federal government already have the ability to, gather intelligence or use lethal force, like the FBI? Well, no, because the FBI is not a part of the Department of Defense. The FBI is a agency or bureau of the federal government, and it was established that way on purpose so that it could be used to investigate and potentially use force on American citizens. The Department of Defense has never had that right, okay? So it's granting itself basically massive new authorities, right, to again kind of think back to the big hubbub of, the Patriot Act or Edward Snowden, whistleblower for the NSA, gathering intelligence on or doing anything against American citizens from the Department of Defense has always been seen as serious. And this one kind of just flew under the radar and is getting no coverage based off of how crazy serious it actually is. All right, so who actually is the authority being granted to? Okay, defense intelligence components. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's a bunch of them. All right, so you have the DIA, you have the NSA that we all know, you have the NGA, the NRO, the SIO, which I think technically would probably fall under the military, so probably couldn't be used, and then the DCSA. Okay, all of these are Department of Defense intelligence agencies. So if you think about how big the NSA is, it's massive, right? And people think, oh, well, it's just the NSA. They just gather intelligence. No, all of these agencies have field operatives. They have tactical teams. The NSA can reach out and touch you with its field operatives, all right? So yes, the NSA can field tactical teams to support local law enforcement agencies, because that's what this law is. But we're going to get into the legal use of force against citizens here in the next part. But that's basically what this memorandum is allowing them to do, is that a agency like the NSA could actually come and support a local law enforcement in not only gathering intelligence on you, but then kicking your door in and potentially smoking you as well. Okay, that's what's serious and huge change. Okay, and it should be very concerning. And based off how little traction it's getting, that's why I want you guys to understand how serious it is, but also how they're getting away with doing this. Okay, so now that we understand the players, who is and who is not, right? Again, you're not going to have Green Berets be able to be technically gathering intelligence on you or kicking in your door, but a ton of defense agencies are now going to have the right to basically operate domestically against American citizens, right? So, yes, that's pretty serious, and we should take that seriously, and we probably should not have allowed this to happen, okay? But let's get into the actual memorandum here of Directive 5240 and talk about the legal use of force section, okay? Because it is actually pretty serious, okay? So it's probably the most serious part of it. So first thing we're going to do, real quick, let me pull up my notes here so I can actually look at it with you guys. All right, so let's actually look at this. Let's put it up on the screen. So this is the first, there's two different sections of this, guys. There's the section about allowing defense agencies to use lethal force, okay? And then there's also a section on gathering intelligence. They're both super serious, two different sections. All right, we're going to cover the lethal force portion first. All right, so we look here right at the start, and it says, defense intelligence components may provide personnel to assist a federal department or agency, including a federal law enforcement agency, think about federal marshals, FBI, something like that, or a state or local law enforcement agency. Your local police department, the NSA, can now come in and support against you, okay? And then it says, when lives are in danger, in response or request to such assistance in accordance with the following approval authorities. All right, so let's say there's a huge election protest and there's an NSA tactical field team that's in danger. They now have the right to use, and we'll get into it in here in section C, lethal force against you, okay? What I want you guys to see under the first section 1 here, this is the most important part of the whole thing, okay? And this is the approval process, or the approving authority, okay? And as you see here, who is allowed to approve this? The Secretary of Defense may approve any type of requested permissible assistance described in paragraph 3.2, which we'll get down to in subset C. The SecDef can approve this. Full stop. Doesn't need Congress, doesn't need the President. The Secretary of Defense can approve this if needed, okay? That is super scary, because whoever's in charge just tells the Secretary of Defense to just do it. And that's it. All right. As we move down, section 2, Sort of just keeps, again, assisting law enforcement agencies. Again, the biggest part here is Section 1 with SecDef's approval. As we get into it, yeah, DOD responds to chemical, biological, radio, and nuclear weapons. Okay, sure. But subset C, this is the big one. This is where everybody is obviously freaking out about, and rightly so. And that is that in assistance in responding with assets with potential for lethality, so responding to an election protest, right, which could end up dangerous and end up in a lethal situation, or any situation, in any situation which it is reasonably foreseeable that providing the requested assistance may involve the use of force that is likely to result in lethal force, including death or serious bodily injury. It also includes all support to civilian law enforcement officials in situation where a confrontation between civilian law enforcement and civilian individuals or groups is reasonably affected. So, yeah, so this basically, again, an election protest that's getting out of control. January 6th, they're now allowed to, in self-defense, open fire on American citizens if they're granted approval authority through the Secretary of Defense. And that is Department of Defense agencies are allowed to do that now in assistance with local law enforcement officers. Yeah, that's it's obviously not good, right? And again, when I talked about how this is going to potentially have second and third order effects downwind from this, and we'll talk about this at the very end of why did they pass this. It's going to make sense when I show some clips from things they're saying. Think about, and they literally said, the Department of Defense came out and said the reason why they're doing this is because we're in an era of unprecedented pre-election potential for violence. Okay, so that's why they did it, right? But where's this violence going to come from? Well, if one of the sides doesn't win and they come out and protest, right, then potentially now that is going to be met with extreme violence and lethal force, which will have been approved by law through this memorandum for these department agencies to use against you. Probably not good, all right, when we talk about using lethal force against unruly protesters. That is obviously not very American, okay? So, yes, we should all be saying, what the hell is going on? Why are we allowing this to happen? Why is nobody stomping their feet about this? And unfortunately, this isn't even the only thing in the memo, okay? The next part is just as bad, and we've been down this road multiple times, like I said, with the Patriot Act, with the NSA being caught spying on American civilians, all right? We've always, and here's what I want you to understand, guys, as you kind of are going to, we go forward, you kind of see the government knows how to use loopholes, right? So how they do it with the Patriot Act, the threat of terrorism, that's why we need to spy on American citizens, okay? Right here, the threat of angry protesters from an election, that's why we need to grant legal use of lethal force against American civilians for the Department of Defense, right? There's always some scare tactic use, legal loophole, and that's, we're going to get back into spying, more legal loopholes, right, that they're using here to pass this. Because again, I thought we keep going down this road about spying on civilians, American citizens and civilians, and we've decided it's not okay. But then they, in passing, just, changed some laws that you didn't notice. Now they're allowed to do it again. Okay, that's what they did here. So, again, let's jump in next to the second portion of this, which is allowing intelligence gathering on American citizens. Great. All right, so we'll put this one up on the board and take a look at it, right? So, not such a big deal to really worry about the applicability here. We need to move down into the policy. What the policy is actually stating and allowing these same defense intelligence components, right? Makes sense. People gather the NSA, right? What is giving the NSA legal authority to do again? Okay, if we drop into subset policy A, okay, what this is going to tell you, all defense intelligence activities will be conducted in accordance with applicable laws, executive orders, and presidential directives. All right, so you have to follow the law, but guess what? They changed the law to make it legal. There you go, and we'll talk about a little bit further down here. You have to obey the Constitution. We're going to learn about how you actually don't have the constitutional rights you think you do through constitutional law, and another way they're going to get past this. Okay, so we jump down to the first number 1 in the policy here. This is obviously stating exactly what they are now allowed to do, which is these DOD intelligence components are now authorized to collect, retain, disseminate information concerning U.S. persons, civilians, and conduct other activities only in accordance with the procedures in this assistance. Okay, and we're going to go down through those. It explicitly states they are allowed to gather intelligence, retain intelligence, and use that intelligence against you as long as they do it and don't breach constitutional rights as we read this. Okay, it's real neat trick they pulled with this one. Okay, so it's very second subset, and they put this in here to make you feel better, right? But we're going to explain why here in a second. It shouldn't. Okay, so must carry out all activities and circumstances in accordance with the Constitution and laws of the United States. Well, they legally allowed them to do this through changing the laws. Right. Next, may not investigate U.S. persons or collect or maintain information about them solely for the purpose of monitoring activities protected by the First Amendment or lawful exercise of rights secured by the Constitution of the United States, which means right to privacy. Okay, so they cannot violate your right to privacy. But what you didn't know is that nowhere in the Constitution is it explicitly stated that you have the right to privacy. It is not a constitutional right. The Supreme Court has interpreted certain amendments, and we'll talk about those in a second, that potentially give right to privacy, but explicitly there is no right to privacy in the Constitution. So what that means here is they are not violating your constitutional rights by breaching your privacy by gathering intelligence on you. They're not, okay? And they wrote this up this way on purpose, all right? And then I kind of explain how this typically happens, okay? So the Supreme Court has, at times, interpreted certain amendments, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, things like that. The Fourth Amendment, right, which is your protection against illegal search and seizure, your right to privacy of your things. But the biggest one, and when it was used up until, and we're going to talk about Roe v. Wade, unfortunately, not that from a political angle, but from it's very, very important on how they're actually, the change in Roe v. Wade, how they're using it here, okay, and that is under the 14th Amendment, okay, which allows basically equal treatment of all citizens, right, 14th Amendment. So the way Roe v. Wade initially was used by the Supreme Court was to give women right to privacy, okay, it gave them explicitly a constitutional right to privacy under the Fourth Amendment because they need to have equal treatment of every other class in society, okay? So they are assuming right to privacy here. The problem now is with Roe v. Wade, and again, I don't care about your pro or anti-abortion, that's not the point. The point is, by overturning Roe v. Wade recently, the Supreme Court has and explicitly stated that women do not have the right to privacy because it is not a constitutional right. Therefore, it goes to the 10th Amendment, to the states, and the states then, because it is abortion is not something that is a constitutional right, as it doesn't fall under a right to privacy anymore. The federal government has no constitutional right for that, so the states get to determine if they want to expand upon or make illegal or not illegal. The states have the right to basically go further with rights or take away your rights as long as it doesn't violate your constitutional rights, which it no longer does. But how that also means here is that since the court has decided the 14th Amendment does not give you or women or anyone right to privacy, you have no right to privacy, which means again, dipso facto, we get back to it, the Department of Defense Intelligence Agency can gather and use intelligence on you freely without breaking your right to privacy because you don't have it. Oh, very, very clever way of doing that, right? Okay, so again, the big problem is Supreme Court sets precedents when they take legal cases, all right? So you might have a case about abortion that has nothing to do with this, but the Supreme Court decision now changes the laws downwind from that, and that's what we're looking at here. So very clever way of them doing it to basically bypass your constitutional rights you thought you had that you don't have. Okay, so long-winded. All right, I hope that sort of gives you guys a better idea of who the players are, okay, what these laws actually mean, how they bypassed laws, right, and statutes to actually pull this off, right, how they're getting past your constitutional rights to pull it off. Now the question is, excuse me, why? Why do this? It seems like an extremely authoritarian thing to do, right? Well, yes, it is, of course. But they've actually, I mean, the current establishment has already said why they're going to do this, and I'm going to play this clip for you, and then we're going to talk about it because he explicitly states exactly why they need to do this. All right, let's check it out.
It to Congress, so it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025 to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified, and then we need bodyguards for everybody in Civil War conditions.
All right, so as you can see, he stated it right there for you, okay? What their plan to do is, if he wins, right, they're going to use Congress, they're going to make him ineligible to win, install who they want, and then when the massive protests come out against that, guess what? He said it so himself there, prepare for Civil War conditions, all right, and use the Department of Defense to potentially squelch and quash any of the attempts to fight back against that, okay? So it's not coincidence that this was just passed right before the election. It's not coincidence that they're saying things like that. So that should make it all holistically, oh, okay. Now it makes sense why they just changed those laws right before probably the most, divisive election in American history. Okay, pretty convenient time to do something like that, right? So, yeah, guys, not good. The fact that this has gotten like almost no traction in the media, other than a couple people like briefly talking about it, and it's kind of crazy. And I do think it's going to be one of those things, much like the Patriot Act, that 5 years from now, or shit, maybe 1 year from now, 10 years from now, some crazy event happens, protests, God forbid, a bunch of Americans are killed from it, and they're going to be able to say, oh, no, actually, remember 10 years ago when we passed the DOD directive that allowed us to do that? Yeah, we were freely allowed to do that under the law, okay? So I think that's potentially probably what we're going to see eventually, is something crazy come from that. So, yeah, guys, for everybody who was asking about this, hopefully that gives you a better idea. And again, there's probably things I missed because it's such a convoluted thing, obviously, but hopefully this gives you guys a better grasp and understanding of what exactly this whole nightmare scenario actually is. All right, guys, catch you in the next one.